Joint Select Committee reviewing the Electricity Act was held on October 1st, 2024, when Minister Albin Hill and the Jamaica Special Economic Zone were given an opportunity to highlight further concerns which they believe ought to have been addressed during the review of the Electricity Act 2015 to encourage persons to invest in special economic zones and ensure the continued viability of the current and potential investors in the zones. Consequently, the committee reviewed their proposal for adjustment to be made to the Act to make provisions for the developers within the SEZ to generate and supply electricity to occupants and customers within the zones, and in circumstances
Recording in progress.
where the single buyer is unable to meet the supply of electricity, that the SEC developers be allowed to meet that supply gap through the introduction of a bilateral contract model. These proposals would affect the definitions of self-generator and a single buyer, and would also require a review of the rights of first refusal, which the minutes of the meeting has more details. The MSET was asked specifically to examine the JSEZA's recommendation in terms of 1, interim solutions of SEZs, develop and propose interim measures to enhance the growth of SEZs while ensuring the electricity prices may be lowered for SEZ developers and occupants. Long-term solutions, economic analysis, provide the committee with an economic analysis and financial modeling on the viability of the existing grid and the single buyer framework and the wider electricity sector as a whole with respect to recommended changes being put forward. The Ministry, SEZ Authority, and the Office of the Parliamentary Council should collaborate to flesh out the specific proposals regarding the recommended changes to be made to the Electricity Act with respect to the interim solutions. The Ministry should also consult with the JPS where necessary. Members agree that the Ministry would need adequate time to adequately examine the proposals. Mr. Richardson of MSET was asked to consult with the committee clerk to provide a realistic timeline within which these tasks could be completed by the Ministry so that a meeting of the committee could be scheduled to review the Ministry's responses to the recommendations made and for the committee to take a final decision on these proposed recommendations. So the report could be updated and finalized. Arising from these consultations, we are here now at a meeting on January 16th. The draft report was adjusted to include the proposals made. It will be further updated once the committee takes a final position on these additional recommendations which have been made. So I'm going to defer the reading and confirmation of the minutes of the meeting of October 1st and the matters arising so that we can get straight into this. I know Mr. Richardson was out. Is he back? Ms. Campbell, are you on?
Good afternoon, Minister. I am on.
All right. Who else is on? Is Mr. Richardson or is he still out?
Good afternoon, Minister. Todd Johnson here from Energy. Mr. Richardson is still out.
He's still out. Okay. So I see on the and Member Golden Campbell, if you can help me, I see on this now. The next would be a continuation of the review of the Electricity Act with the input from Mr. Mike Callahan, and then after that, the decisions on the proposals made by the Jamaica Special Economic Zone Authority for definitions of self-generator and single buyer to be adjusted for a review of the right of first refusal. So, Mr. Callahan, welcome. Thanks for making yourself available. You could just introduce yourself and obviously your background, and then certainly go into your presentation. Again, thanks for making yourself available through the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, which I'm sure will be very insightful. Over to you, sir.
Fantastic. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I'm hearing you. Everybody hearing Mr. Callan okay?
Yes, Minister.
Great.
Go ahead, sir.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to share some insights on island electricity systems pricing as well as policy considerations. We really applaud what Jamaica is doing to ensure that they have affordable, reliable, and resilient energy supplies for all their island inhabitants. As I said, I'm Mike Callahan. I'm with the U.S. National Renewable Energy Laboratory. NREL is the acronym. And NREL is a nonprofit, federally funded research and development center of approximately 4,000 people. And we are advancing the science and engineering of clean energy systems. I've been fortunate to be in the energy sector for about 27 years. I've worked on islands for about 15 years, from both the Pacific to the Caribbean, and also been collaborating with MSET in Jamaica. I have two colleagues on who will also be available, Ricardo Bracho, as well as Jose Molina Andres, who will join and be ready for question and answers. What we had envisioned for this time was to share some information related to some key areas that Mr. Richardson had indicated to us were of concern and warranted further discussion during this today. Those topics are related to electricity prices on islands, utility business models and regulatory models, and independent system operators. Those are very large topics, and we will not get into details, and obviously the committee has worked a lot on this already. But we thought, as terms of the structure of this, potentially about a 15-minute presentation to cover some of these items, starting first with just electricity prices on islands, as well as then getting into the other policy topics, and then following that, any questions and answers for as long as you'd like. I'll just double check with the chairman. Is that acceptable, or do you have any other requests or suggestions, sir?
Member Golding, Campbell, if you could just, I know you were in the last meeting. I'm fine with that, but I'm not sure whether or not, based on the discussions that you were leading.
Chair, that's exactly what we had discussed.
Excellent. Go ahead, sir.
And queried.
Great. So, and please let me know if I assume you can see my screen. I just adjusted the slide to be sharing just an initial map that's showing. I'm going to use a little bit of the examples of Hawaii. The Hawaiian Islands are a series of islands that have set a goal to be 100% renewable. And for over the last decade, they've been working on advancing renewable energy. And it's an interesting case study of lessons learned both on electricity prices as well as with policies. So there's a lot to learn from what they've gone through over the last decade, and fortunate to share some of those lessons during today's discussion. And one quick check, I assume you can see my slides okay. Is that correct? Here, yes, yes, thumbs up, great. So this is the island of Kauai. On the island of Kauai, you can see for over the last decade, they started on an annual basis, and about 10% of their island electricity was from renewable energy. But starting in 2015, they really started to ramp up the renewable energy penetration up to the 67% on an annual basis. And you can see what happened with that increase of renewable energy to their electricity prices. So these are their electricity prices decreased and then stabilized at the 35, 38, 36 cents. This graph doesn't show battery energy storage systems. This next plot is an interesting graph showing all of the Hawaiian Islands and what happened to this one island in Kauai, where here again, you can see it relatively maintained its electricity prices. We have the electricity rates in cents here on the y-axis and then the years on the x-axis. As you can see, there was a drastic increase in every other island's electricity prices that happened particularly in 2022, whereas in Kauai, which had the greatest amount of renewable energy penetration, 156% of their total peak load and 58% on an annual basis, they were able to mitigate and manage that. So it provides a really interesting case study to learn from. For comparison, Jamaica is currently in these numbers at about 28% on a peak and about 12% on an annual basis. So what happened in 2022 was the war in Ukraine. So you can see here in the graph on the left side, with a substantial increase in the fossil fuel commodity prices, both natural gas, coal, oil, all drastically increased. Various analyses had indicated as such, as well as St. Kitts and Nevis minister highlighting the challenges that it had in their island nation and the need for them to implement subsidies to subsidize the price of electricity. Again, that is exactly what happened to all the Hawaiian islands. Because of the more fossil fuel that was used for their electricity sector, the greater that their prices increased, up to as high as 50 cents per kilowatt hour. You can see again the example of Kauai, which had the greatest amount of renewable energy, was able to mitigate and manage those high energy costs. Going to the case of Jamaica, right now in their generation and their mix, it's approximately close to 90% of the entire generation is fossil fuel based, primarily with LNG. Here is interesting information just highlighting how much of this fuel cost is influencing the electricity bills. So is the overwhelming majority of the cost of the electricity bills is related to fossil fuel use. And that can vary drastically. You can see just even in 1 month, there's a 33% change. And that change has actually also caused some fluctuations with commercial and industrial customers. Well, they could potentially, on a month where there's less costs, come back to JPS and purchase more electricity versus on other months using their own generation on site. So it's just an illustration of the challenge of electricity prices is predominantly driven by the use of fossil fuel, and that is then mitigated by renewables. This graph here shows throughout the entire Caribbean region, what is the average electricity price per all of these utilities throughout the region, where you can see JPS is in the middle of this mix. And you can also see there's a few outliers. Those outliers in Trinidad, as well as in Suriname, partly for those are at locations where they're able to leverage their own fossil fuel supplies for electricity generation. So interesting, again, continuing to highlight the relative cost of electricity, the influence of fossil fuels, and the greater the amount of renewable, the less, either the less use of fossil fuels or the local access to fossil fuels impacts the price of electricity. So that is the summary of how electricity prices and managing those, and how in Hawaiian Islands, their path towards renewable energy and adding more and more renewables, where they're surpassed on Kauai 50%, they're able to manage these global spikes in fuel costs and manage their electricity prices. The second topic I was going to just briefly cover related to utility ownership models. So this is a study that was started it's a publicly available study through the state of Hawaii that was by London Economics International that looked at various utility business models. You can see here there's 8 different models, from an investor-owned utility, municipal, cooperative model. And so they, this analysis started in 2019, evaluated what are the opportunities for utility ownership models within the Hawaiian Islands, and then evaluated what are the pros and cons of various criteria for those. One of these models, grid defection, is similar to what's being proposed in the special economic zones, where generation and microgrids would have diverse ownership and could begin to supplant the existing grid. In this Hawaiian analysis, it looked at these metrics on the side, the ability to meet the state renewable energy goals, which is 100%, as well as how do they lower costs for all of the island residents, stakeholder interests, and so forth. But trying to highlight primarily right now this question of cost for all of the consumers, from a very good ranking to a poor ranking. You can see the very stark difference between a single buyer business model versus a grid defection model, and the impact that that can have on electricity prices for all consumers on an island, such as the islands in Hawaii. And the reason for that, or one of the reasons for that, is just basics of a business break-even point analysis, where you have revenue here on the y-axis, on the x-axis, the number of units sold, income, cost, and a break-even point. So as more and more entities, if in Hawaii, if there was a grid defection, or more and more entities were starting to generate their own electricity and sell, it would reduce the amount of units sold from a utility. The utility in Hawaii, Hawaiian Electric, would have less revenue, less units sold, but they still have a fixed cost for maintaining all this existing infrastructure, which is then spread out over fewer and fewer customers and fewer amount of electricity revenue. That causes either a loss for the utility, or it causes the utility to have to increase electricity prices on the fewer customers that are remaining. So that is why, again, in this consumer savings, that is in the business model of grid defection, of why Hawaii had chosen not to pursue that as their own business model. In addition to utility business model, of course, in a monopoly or other type is the critical importance of a regulator and the regulator authority. This study also analyzed the various models of regulations, from the status quo, a new type. They have a Public Utilities Commission, but also looking at a reliability, Hawaiian Electric Reliability Administrator, performance-based regulation, independent grid operator. So there's various options with, again, pros and cons. Where they have chosen to shift to in Hawaii is related to the current Public Utilities Commission, as well as seeking to implement Hawaiian Electric Reliability Administrator, and also seeking to transition they started in 2018, so 7 years ago, and are still in the midst of the transition to performance-based regulation. Some solutions that Hawaii has been able to implement in this idea of reliability, cost, and resilience is a microgrid tariff. Hawaii is only the second state in the entire US that has this type tariff, California being the other. And this is where they are allowing entities, whether it be an individual home or a group, a commercial, or a government agency, to construct their own microgrids. But they become participants within the larger grid, and there is able to sell that to the utility, and the utilities benefit and the islands benefit. During emergencies, there's the additional benefit that then those individuals, as well as whether it be commercial or government, if there were an emergency such as a severe storm or a hurricane, they could then operate independently. But it's only this microgrid services tariff is only limited to those cases. Additionally, they're doing significant investments within their grid and grid modernization to enable this two-way energy flow for prosumers, so that you have the island system and consumers all working together for that goals of affordability, reliability, and resilience. One very good example of this I was fortunate to be involved with when I lived in Hawaii was at the Pacific Missile Range Facility, which is a Department of Defense military installation. So rather than saying that they wanted to do an own microgrid and disconnect from the grid, they partnered with the utility in this case, and the utility partnered with a private sector developer to build a 14 megawatt solar array and a 70 megawatt hour battery. On a day-to-day basis, all of that electricity is sent to the utility and then distributed throughout the island of Kauai. It lowers the energy prices on the island of Kauai, mitigates against changes to the fossil fuel prices, and is also benefits their 100% renewable goal. That's on the day-to-day case. If or when there becomes a hurricane in Kauai and the electricity to that Department of Defense installation is canceled or cut off, they're able to become a microgrid, whether to supply energy to that location or to others. There's a great benefit too, because these larger projects have larger economies of scale. If the base were just going to do it themselves, the individual project on a unit basis would cost more. If they were to become their own microgrid or actually grid defect, typically utilities, the process is it's standby charges that the utility is there to be able to provide power, or departing load charges. So other utilities mitigate those challenges, but it's not needed in this case because it's a successful public-private partnership. Finally, wanted to just very briefly highlight on another large topic that was mentioned in the models on independent system operators. So independent system operators are common on the mainland US. You can see here, this is a Federal Energy Regulatory Commission map that's showing the different zones within the US. And these zones, in most of the cases, are actually even connected. So Cal ISO and Southwest ERCOT being an exception. The difference is these markets are enormous in comparison to the size of the island peak load in Jamaica. So a place like in California Independent System Operator with a 84 gigawatt load is over 84 times larger in terms of managing the electricity supply in California. It also then has so many different generators that no one generator can manipulate the costs of the price of energy. The challenge when you have very small markets and independent system operators is you have too few entities to manage who could then potentially control the price of electricity and generation. An example of that happened many years ago in England and Wales, where there was a few generators that were able to control the price of energy in a smaller market. So that is why typically we do not see independent system operators or RTOs in island settings just because of the economies of scale and the size, not to mention the cost to implement and operate these independent system operators. We look forward to the questions and discussions. This is a lot of topics, again, on energy pricing and the influence of fossil fuel and how to mitigate that with renewable energy, utility and regulatory business models, and independent system operators. Again, this is part of the Clean Energy Solutions Center. I appreciate their support in the U.S. government. We are a neutral, nonprofit, independent agency willing to help advance the science and engineering of clean energy systems, and look forward to your questions and comments on this. And we'll also appreciate my colleagues to jump in as well. And again, appreciations to MSET for their collaboration on this effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Very concise but very informative presentation. I'm hoping that it will guide our members on the Joint Select Committee that had issues and concerns as it relates to our situation here in Jamaica, and of course, the best way to go forward. So I'm going to open the floor. I'm sure that there are questions and clarifications that members would have. So if you can just indicate your wish to speak and go right ahead.
My time, Minister, I'm not seeing how to raise my hand on this.
That's fine, your time. You get that because you have been sat in for me so diligently over the past few months.
Thank you. I have an easy question. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Callahan. I found it quite informative. In fact, I'm going to have to listen again after this meeting just to make sure I'm digesting everything you've said. But my question is, what exactly is the population of Hawaii?
If I can share my screen
The Hawaiian
again.
Islands.
So is that all right if I share my screen?
Yes, please, go ahead.
I have some backup slides. Good questions. And so it's a good, the short answer is roughly, if you look at Jamaica, Jamaica has a 682 megawatt peak. And what you're getting at is, I'm looking, because in some ways your question, on Oahu, for instance, it's 1 million people, but they use more energy on Oahu than in Jamaica. And Jamaica has a larger population. So to me, in electrical systems, we look at the peak load. So
Right.
Jamaica has a 682 peak and varies depending on the year. And in Oahu, it's a 929 megawatt peak. So Oahu is very similar in size. And then you can see here, and there's too much detail. This is the backup slides, but the difference in the amount of renewable energy. Oahu currently has, in this case, 87% renewable. Kauai is unique. It's only 80 megawatts. So it is a much smaller island, but it's a good example technically that they've already been able to do over 125 megawatts of PV well above their peak, and they're adding energy storage. And that's why they have more and more renewable energy and less of all the Hawaiian Islands. Kauai is the leader in terms of the percent penetration, but Maui and others that are following are close. So I'll leave it on that slide.
You hit right where I was hoping to go. Thank you.
Anybody else? Any member Paul, member Hilton, member Miller? Anybody else?
Minister, may I?
Certainly, sir. Go ahead.
Right. So Mr. Callahan, I wanted some clarification. I came in a little late just when you were beginning your presentation, and I didn't hear what the minister had to say to contextualize it, but if I recall, the issue we're addressing is the concern about a model for the special economic zone. Am I correct?
The example or the similarities are in the model in the example of Hawaii, and the model that it's referred to is referred to as grid defection. So we understand it's not a one-to-one comparison, but we also understand the goals of trying to lower the energy costs for all consumers across the island, which is mitigating that through fossil fuels, as well as trying to lower the cost of energy in special economic zones to incentivize development and economic activity in Jamaica. There could be other ways to do that, and the challenge of reducing the load, the revenue through special economic zones is a more thorough analysis of what that could do to impact other consumers, residential throughout the island, as well as it's challenging for smaller entities that still have to serve their load to gain the economies of scale with larger energy systems. So if you have a utility that can do a 100 megawatt plant of PV, they'll get a cost that's much lower than, say, a commercial entity that can do a 1 megawatt plant, just because of economies of scale. So it's actually a utility can have on a PPA price an actual lower price of electricity on a solar development than, say, one entity doing a smaller project.
No, I hear the observation, but the two things. I mean, were you briefed and advised in doing the analysis that of the existing system, the existing arrangement whereby larger commercial entities under the current arrangement are allowed to come off the grid, to have the grid defection, as you call it, in the existing arrangement? And that has been happening here in Jamaica. So that what you have is the prospect then that unless the system is revisited and how it's structured, you could well have, in short order, the large commercial users who use a small number in percentage-wise, but use a large amount of electricity. My information is about 40% or so. If they defect from the grid, which is happening now, which is what the current framework allows, you could well end up with consumers, the price of consumers increasing on an annualized basis. It is in that context, therefore, that the issue of the special economic zones, that in the model, under the existing legislation, calls for the developers to identify their own customers, separate and apart from, to be, for example, an occupant under the current law, Jamaican law, in the SEC. You have to find your own customers, new customers. You couldn't, for example, the model is premised on you bringing in foreign investors or local investors or local investment, let me put it that way, local investments. So what you have now is that under the single buyer arrangement, developers who have now to bring in mainly foreign investors, but some local investors in different projects. You have the prospect now of them, the developers, bearing all the cost of development, bringing their customer in and turning them over to JPS on a single buyer basis. And therefore, at the same time, the large commercial investors from Jamaica existing are allowed to come off the grid. So we have a situation where you really are inviting foreigners to come in to subsidize or to buttress a grid that we have designed now and allowed our largest commercial users to come off the grid using whatever fuel, whether the LNG or renewable energy. That's the framework, and that's the conundrum we find ourselves in. And that's the context in which the question of developers in the SCC and our experience with the existing SCC legislation, which is persons are not willing to come into the SCC and then have to go on the grid and face the single buyer rates, which are just uneconomic, just make them uneconomic. That's our challenge. So I don't know how your specific, the range, I've listened to you intently, and I don't think any of your model speaks to the situation currently existing in Jamaica.
So we appreciate the comments and the statements, and I'll answer those. And this information that we're sharing is at an initial level. This is not this study, for instance, in Hawaii that was done over years. This was done in a short initial analysis based on what we've seen after working for 15 years on islands and over 20 different islands. The first comment that you made is on the commercial and industrial. And we have been aware and heard that the commercial and industrial customers are leaving and coming back to JPS. And it seems to be what we've been informed related to energy prices that are likely related to the fuel price fluctuation on a month-to-month basis. I can say in other locations and other regulations have two charges that do not allow that. That would require a standby charge, meaning that if a customer were to leave, they would have to pay a fee to have that service that the utility is providing, because the utility is there when they need that electricity, that 24/7 reliable electricity, as well as what's called a departing load charge. So that structure, meaning that the amount of load that the utility has already built, and the utility has contracts in many locations, not unique to Jamaica, for decades. Those contracts are planned on the amount of energy use through the integrated resource and resilience planning. So those charges are borne by those who leave. So that's a challenge that has been mitigated through rate and tariff design. And that is one strategy that would then ensure that you would have the C&I customers, commercial and industrial customers, actions not impacting the price of electricity on the larger entities. The special economic zones, well, we've seen the letters and the proposals. What we're encouraging, if there could be, for instance, we haven't seen is tax credits or tax breaks on energy prices is a totally different strategy that some may use to lower, in effect, the net reduction of cost to a business for electricity, but it would not impact the other challenges, that the unintended consequences of a special economic zone to have a act that could be seen as grid defection. There could be other strategies that could manage that. The examples that we gave in Hawaii is how can you have it where there is a benefit to where that the entities that are developing these opportunities it's a public-private partnership with regulator, the utility, and the private entities. And that was the example we were giving in Hawaii, where they've been successful in allowing, through what they called a microgrid tariff, to be able to do that. So we're saying it doesn't seem, there's been a lot of detailed analysis that we've seen in other locations. We have not ever seen, and doesn't mean it doesn't exist, this special economic zone grid defection in other locations, which we were asked to evaluate, and we just have not seen it. And we're just raising these considerations and other solutions that may be worthwhile for consideration that could help. We applaud the objectives of trying to keep energy prices low, trying to have reliable and resilient energy. And so those with those themes, there could be other strategies. And then there's the uniqueness of this is it's a small island system, of a 700 megawatt island system. So those impacts of these large C&I customers and what you do, what is done in the policies and the tariff design is really just this basic business model of how that it's going to impact the revenue, the cost, and the fixed cost. And that's why we're using Hawaii, which has been for the last over a decade been in these development of renewables, development of tariffs, and development of strategies to mitigate what's really the root challenge is fossil fuel prices. Because those C&I customers and the developers are still going to be paying equal or more of that fossil fuel charge. Thanks.
So, may I follow that up, Minister, the question?
Sure. And I think Member Hilton, I think what you need to express also is that we're trying to find something that we can use as an immediate solution while going for the medium to long-term solution. I think that's the key.
That's correct. That we're trying to affect growth in the economy, employment, by mitigating the cost of electricity in these zones. And first benefit, of course, is to attract investor interest, incentivizing investors or investment into the zone. But in the model that you spoke about, I understand the small market size. I understand the wider question of how you design such a system where there is, as you call it, grid defection taking place. And the point we're looking at at the moment, we're looking at two models. One in which the defection is already occurring, and one that is being thought about and saying, listen, how can we allow the defection to happen in that general way? And at the same time, with the increased cost to consumers generally on the grid, and at the same time ask investors, new investors, to come in and to sign up to this increasingly costly arrangement. Because if the logic is, if the new investors coming in are signed up and a part of the grid, then that would reduce the cost. Then why are you allowing the existing to continue to defect from the grid without any of the mitigating factors that you pointed about through a tariff-based system to cushion the impact on the system? And so, to the minister's point, we're looking at an immediate response to that situation, because the existing situation is not only is it untenable, it's not sustainable.
I hear the comment and appreciate the clarification on an immediate response to divide immediate, medium, and long term. And that goes in this Hawaii example, and the example I used, although being a military installation, was utility private partnership microgrids. So can you have, say you have a large customer, and that's where I was using, that has a large land holding that also has a large electricity load. Is there a way to evaluate where the utility, the customer, and the developer all work together in a utility bilateral agreement, so that the there's some use for all benefits? Because, for instance, another example, if there's an outage, there could be a benefit, demand response programs where the utilities say, well, we'll call on this entity to go off the grid as a benefit for managing electricity supplies across the island, particularly during an emergency. So there's a benefit there. So if you have a specific proposal, a specific zone, a specific land holding, and that's somewhat similar to this, unique deals, and even in Hawaii, that they have unique not outside of their microgrid tariff. And so that's the immediate of individual, these, you could call it trilateral contracts or contracts that are still have the utility, particularly right now because of not having, you have a single buyer, you have integrated utility for transmission, distribution, generation. So in those unique cases, can you do basically project-based structures and agreements to more quickly accelerate some economic opportunity as well as energy generation if there's a large customer?
Understood. But so the challenge is twofold. It's both the size, and now I'm going to the microgrid situation, and the fuel, because I think the investors, the developers, would naturally go for a fuel, in this instance, renewable energy, that can control the cost and not subjected to the vagaries of the fossil fuel industry globally. And so they would have a choice. Part of the issue here now is that under the single buyer arrangement, they have no option. They don't even have leverage to negotiate with the existing utility. They just have to, go like a lamb to the slaughter in this arrangement. And investors have told me that they look at the model and they shy away from it because that's not a win-win situation for them. I don't know, Minister, if the existing tariff arrangement with the existing utility provider have the flexibility for them to enter into these trilateral arrangements, as Mr. Callahan mentioned.
That's something that we can check, but I want to reiterate your point to Mr. Callahan that the biggest stumbling block to the expansion of the special economic zones is the issue of the electricity costs, and this has been from jump. So I understand very clearly Member Hilton, who was minister responsible for the SEC at one time, his position, which is shared by obviously all of us on the committee, based on the fact that it is stifling growth of the SEC and growth of the country. So I think that's pretty much why we're trying to see whether or not there is a interim solution that can reduce the cost while obviously we delve deeper into the changes that need to be made, more medium long term.
And that's the challenge, is that the challenge is costs and the cost of electricity. I mean, that's the bottom line. But the reason that it's expensive on islands, not just in Jamaica, is it's susceptible to the cost of fuel. And so giving special economic zones these new options isn't going to change the cost of the global fuel market. And so that's the reality, that what is happening with the commercial and industrial customers is they're just arbitraging with the price of fuel on when they will use their electricity. So that's why you have to use other incentives. I don't know the tax opportunities or other breaks of the economic generation from the zones, credits, deductions on expenses to mitigate that. I'm sure you're trying to avoid the unintended consequences of having an impact on ratepayers throughout the island by lowering the amount of electricity sales and revenue. So that's why it's complicated, and that the way to do it is, if it's an urgent item, is to look at unique agreement structures with utility and with the regulator, with the utility, and that's, I'm using that to say that's what we've seen in other island locations to be able to do this quicker, because the example of Hawaii and Kauai, it's taken a decade to get to all of these renewables, and only then have they been able to stabilize their electricity prices. And Jamaica is not unique in the high electricity prices. It's on all islands that we're working on. It's related to the price of fuel.
You mentioned other countries outside of Hawaii. Could you share that with us? If you have
Yeah.
it, not immediately, but I mean, when we finish this meeting, so we could circulate it.
This is the graph, and this was so quick. This is all the other countries. This is the energy price, and just in the Caribbean. So these acronyms these are all the utilities on all the other islands. So be it Barbados, Bermuda. So so you can look at, if you're Bermuda Electric Light Company, the average. This is 2024 from a report from Carolec. It's over 52 cents. So all of these countries, Dominica, St. Vincent, Barbados, so these are all your international countries in the electricity prices. And as I was pointing out, it was quick and it's a lot to digest, just particularly when you have all these acronyms. But what we're showing is that this is a common challenge that's related to, on all the islands, it's related to this commodity that, the overwhelming majority of the cost on any island is going to be your fuel cost, and that's borne by all the individuals. And the places where you see the difference is places like in Trinidad, because they can produce oil and subsidize and use their own oil. The same in Suriname. So anyway, that's a quickly answer your question, but I'm also happy to talk on other islands. We work on islands in the Pacific Islands, in Fiji and Palau, Galapagos Islands. A similar situation, but the details are different in all the islands.
May I ask a question? Clarifying question. In those, I understand the fuel issue, the impact of global fuel. I understand that. But there are two considerations here that we're talking about: the possibility and the opportunity for microgrids using renewable energy, solar in our case, and others. But using solar that the links from the fossil fuel and the microgrid system, again, depending on the size of the holding, the land holding. So you would have, let's say, in a optimum sized area for a grid, a microgrid system, a number of entities. So it's not single entities, single occupants, but several potentially large scale occupants like factories or other high energy intensive users in that zone. So I haven't heard that analysis. I've heard a straight line about the cost of impact of fuel generally, which I agree with. And that's a problem. That's a recognition of the problem. Yeah. That we tied into a global market that itself is unstable. Yeah. And fluctuates rapidly and impacts the system. So generally, I think you also confirm the knowledge and the understanding in Hawaii that with renewable energy, you're able to better stabilize the prices and to react to the global market. Hence, we are very clear that one of the opportunities for Jamaica is solar, another renewable, and the microgrid system within a framework of, say, a special economic zone.
And this is a great question, and it's a big misconception. So I appreciate it. I've been working in developing microgrids for over a decade. And the challenge is, this comes to an engineering side of, you put a solar array up that's 10 megawatts, say, for instance, or 1 megawatt. It only is producing that electricity for those 6 hours or 7, 8 hours, whenever the sun is shining. But that commercial and industrial customer is going to need, obviously, like everyone, 24/7. So microgrids, they're typically hybrid microgrids. So you could have wind, you could have solar, but they often have a fossil fuel component. Right. And so why you don't see on all the islands we're working on, it's rare, And I'll use a quick example in Dominica where we've worked, because we looked at this question of Dominica. It's different because it has a geothermal resource. They were thinking of building a microgrid on the north part of the island to avoid transmission costs. What I'm getting at is the microgrid economics, and even for commercial and industrial customers, still has a fossil fuel component because they need that 24/7. You could replace that 24/7 diesel generator in a microgrid with a battery, but batteries are expensive, and the efficiency losses, and it still is only, typically battery markets are only 4 to 7 hours. So that battery example that I gave and Kauai was a leader, and that's where they aren't promoting microgrids. It's considering the entire island as one microgrid. And so that's the benefit of economies of scale, doing larger projects, that you're still in these locations, they're using fossil fuels, but less and less. But it's when you go to a small building or business or small parcel, a microgrid often can be expensive because it still requires fuel, it requires a diesel generator, controls. There's not enough room for solar generation. You're often land constrained, so you can't get the solar generation. So this is where there's a misconception of, well, in developers, and we don't sell these. We're a neutral nonprofit organization trying to provide policy information in a neutral way to policymakers. And I think this is the disconnect of, while it's a solution, it's not a guarantee that in each case it can reduce the cost. So that's why in the immediate term is, how could you develop or encourage the development of microgrids that helps eventually stabilize costs, helps lower the cost in the special economic zone, but then also in collaboration with having the impacts to ratepayers throughout the island.
Yeah. Let me complicate it a little bit more. So in the situation that I just posited, it's the microgrid as a sort of standalone, with varying size of parcel of land. But there is a scenario in which everybody benefits, including the utility, where the microgrid of a certain size, because the economics of size is a constant. So given that fact, if an appropriate size, so the microgrid, a SCZ with a microgrid operation generates electricity for the SCZ. Obviously, that would only work if the price is better than what the utility provides. Otherwise, it makes no economic sense. And this is why I'm in favor of a tweaking of the existing system to give the developer options and to break the single buyer concept, because that is an obligation on developer to simply sign up to the grid, the existing large grid, whether it can meet his particular need or not. If the developer, given its size, and I'm not saying all SEZ would benefit or qualify, but if there's an assessment and evaluation by the developer that he's better off with a microgrid and with battery backup or whatever the system is, then he should be given an option. If it is not a better option, then I think the second option is to have a negotiation, the trilateral discussion agreement that you mentioned about with the regulator, the SEZ developer, and in this case the utility. But in a current arrangement, choice is non-existent. Whether you can afford the upfront investment or the cost of putting in appropriate system that will have long-term sustainable positive impact on your business. That doesn't matter. What trumps everything is what is in the national interest and not in the firm well, not what is in the overall interest and not in the firm's interest. And no firm, or in very limited situation, most firms would not make that decision about investing in their firm if the net cost to them is carrying a burden for the general system. And that's just basic, economic consideration. And this is where we find ourselves.
And the challenge to add, to clarify, is these investments in microgrids are usually 20, 25, 30-year investments. And the firm might have today and think of, I know for the next year I can sign a fuel contract at this price and my microgrid is this. But then what happens when the fuel jumps and they still need the diesel fuel for their diesel generators? Then they'll look to go back to the utility. And the utility is forced to carry these longer term goals in planning and economics. And so that's why typically in other areas, they look at this, and that's what this microgrid tariff that they spent years developing in Hawaii, it's again only the second, was this utility private partnership. Microgrids is a special separate case, and that might be where you accelerate these to see, is there a good opportunity where there's large project, large parcel, large energy user that then could help, that brings, it's similar to an independent power producer arrangement that can help lower the cost of electricity for the island and help lower the cost of electricity. And that's what this example is at this parcel on the island of Kauai. It's a special, unique case, and it's different because this utility is a cooperative. It's not an investor-owned utility. So they're able to do a quick arrangement, lease the land from the military. Military is holding this, all of that energy is generated. It's a low cost of electricity. It lowers and stabilizes the cost, but then provides that resilience for this location. So it's a unique special case that was developed, benefited by a co-op model in Kauai.
Yeah, but again, let me just make one observation.
Yep.
You again, in your response, ties this again to fossil fuel and the instability. And I'm saying it's clear that we have to move away from a mixed system of solar, well, renewable, with even, again, depending on the project, some amount of fossil fuel. But I'm saying the project doesn't get to analyze their options in the single buyer model. The option just doesn't exist, regardless of the particular circumstance of the firm and the investment decision that the firm has to make. Because it's firms that invest largely in our business. It's not, we don't have a lot of the cooperative model, and that we're not discounting that as a possibility, but it's the private sector as a firm, individual firm, that make those investment decisions.
And this is why it's challenging and unique. It's because utilities are natural monopolies, and there's adjustments in these different models, investor-owned, municipal, co-op, hybrid, all these different models. And in this transition of models, looking at all these, balancing these complications of how do you keep energy prices affordable for all, and it sounds, the urgency to do that. And so in the existing model that is existing in Jamaica, that could be looking at the trilateral type of agreements to accelerate, where you have the ability to negotiate with people that want to bring money, that want to lower the cost of energy for the firm as well as for all ratepayers. But it's rather than trying, it could create an opportunity to look at do actions and activities that are project-based, initial scale, and then scale and replicate those in the medium and long term, and then see how those could be incorporated into longer policy implementations.
Well, the point the minister makes, I want to come back to. So that's a consideration in the response, which is in the current SEZ arrangement and a broader electricity arrangement, both in its generation and the transmission and sale, is that you have a situation where the current arrangement allow for large-scale industry and commercial actors to come off the grid, to defect. Currently, that's the law, right? So in that situation, we observe from experience, long-term experience, because this act has been in place since 2014, I think, 2014, 2015. And you're attracting no large-scale investor, which is one of the objectives, principally because of electricity costs. And so while you say, and I understand your analysis, which looks to the wider population, but we're, as the minister said, and I'm repeating, we're looking for a short, medium, and long-term solution, because we appreciate the complication that goes into all of this, which will take time. We are saying, if under the existing situation, our system allows large industrial actors and commercial actors to defect, why are you requiring a large new investor coming in with money when you're allowing existing investors to defect? A large investor coming in with money to make the investment decision is being told that the same system and arbitrage or whatever the conditions are that the existing industrial and commercial users are running away from. You're telling them, oh, well, but you have to come into this and make your investment decision on the basis that you have to tie yourself into the single buy arrangement. That doesn't make sense. That's not logical.
The challenge, what I hear you saying, is that already the grid defection that's happening is a challenge, and that is a existing challenge, and that is typically managed through other rate design and tariff design that prevents that, so that it doesn't cause a impact to ratepayers on an island or a location. So that is one challenge to resolve. It would to then further complicate it by expanding that. I hear if you have a challenge and you're going to expand it, is there another solution that doesn't impact the electricity sector and ratepayers? And I don't know, but in terms of economic incentives, or there tax credits that could be negotiated with private developers related to energy expenditures, related to their revenue and taxes that they wouldn't be required to pay. I'm not saying that's the answer. I'm just saying that things that would not impact the electric sector and unintended consequences, because I completely understand investment is a goal, job growth, low energy prices, affordability, reliability, resilience, all goals. It's how do you manage the current challenge of C&I customers, which is already causing challenges of planning, developing renewables, solving that challenge, and then trying to figure out a new step for special economic zones, which would increase the grid defection challenge. So that's the thought to consider before making these maybe larger policy considerations, and just offering caution based on what we've seen in other locations.
But again, I hear. Just let me clarify one thing. So it's the SEZ is currently not a defection from the grid. We're talking about the developer having to find, under the existing law and the way it's structured, you have to find new customers, not existing customers. What we're allowing domestically is a defection from the grid. So I don't agree with the analysis that says the SEZ is a defection, because it's not. It's only in the sense that the current law requires everybody except existing large-scale industrial and commercial firms who can defect once they determine the arbitrage. But you're saying to new investors, people now having to make new decisions about investment in Jamaica, that you have no option but to sign up to the existing arrangement. And that's what I'm saying to you. I don't agree that represents a defection from the existing system. It does not. Because the law, just for your information, limits the occupants and you in a SEC to new customers, new users, new investors, not the existing customer base of JPS or the utility, current utility. Not. Do you appreciate that difference? The law does not allow, under the SEC Act, for existing C&I industrial and commercial firms or operations to come into the SEC space. They cannot do that. It must be new customer that the developer has to find, either internationally or from new investment. It's new investment. So they're not existing investment. So it cannot be a defection.
And there's another opportunity that we have seen in other islands where the new investment, not only does it help promote job growth, economic opportunity, but it also helps with the electrical infrastructure.
Right.
The more, if you had a trilateral agreement with new investment, you could add, it's bringing in, say, a solar battery diesel microgrid that is in part not just benefiting an individual firm that wants to invest, but it could be trilateral, or it actually, that benefit also helps the electrical sector, both in resilience and affordability. And that's what we've seen in other locations of having that adding to the entire, and it's the uniqueness of islands that's why Kauai is one island, these models of having other investors also contribute and be part of the electrical system on the island.
That's the model that I'm looking at, where the new investor adds to, rather than, as the previous analysis assumes, that is defecting, subtracting from, and it's not. It's not a defection, I would argue. It is a potential addition by building in resilience, because if in fact the new investment in the SEC can generate at lower cost, then there can be a mechanism in which that lower cost is benefited, the general grid is benefited from that lower cost, rather than adding higher cost to him, and then say that the government should find to use its fiscal resources to solve the problem. So I must tell you, I strongly believe that it is not fair, it's not economic justice, and it's not going to happen just because it's not common sense to create, and we've experienced it, because over the last several years we've had the SEC, we've had no large-scale investor, none, because they're not interested in signing up to a system that imposes higher costs on them. What the current utility favors is for them to charge those higher costs, and the government uses its fiscal tools to address the problem, which is a fiscal cost to the government and the taxpayer. And I'm saying, we have to find something, and I am in favor of that system where the new investor bringing in new technology, for one, because let me make the observation, Minister, that part of the challenge we have is that under the existing system, even in this right of first refusal requirement, Minister, that's why that becomes problematic as well. Because if a large or several large investment, and we are now moving, I'm told by the Minister of Finance, who makes this announcement, that we're going to once and for all bring forward this large pioneering investment legislation with $1 billion US as the minimum. If that were to happen, and you have 3 or 4 large-scale investors coming on stream, I wonder where we get the investment coming to for that additional expense on the grid ownership and the grid owners.
Recording stopped.
So I'm saying, Minister, what I'm in favor of is let those new investors, those large-scale investment of $1 billion at a minimum, there must be a threshold. Let them have a clear decision to make on the electricity model that they wish to pursue. Otherwise, you're gonna have problems marketing those new investments if you say your only choice is to sign up to the existing high cost energy structure, which may lower it over time, but this doesn't help them in an investment decision that they have to make now. So, yeah, I think I'm not in favor of a system that complicates the already challenged system without fixing that challenge, the existing challenge. And you can't market a product by simply saying to them, oh, well, the answer to our problem lies in you coming to Jamaica, because that's one of the only ways in which we can solve our problem. That doesn't make sense. That's not a good investment pitch. And no Minister of Investment is going to make a lot of progress selling that model to investors that says, well, welcome to Jamaica, welcome to high electricity costs. And the only prospect is, well, if you make your investment, then we may see some incremental benefits to the cost of electricity. That's not attractive. We have to fix it. We have to find answers now because our economy is faltering.
Absolutely. And the truth be told is that there's a famous saying that if you do the same thing over and over and expect to get a different result, then you're either crazy or something else. Members, let me open the floor to you. Mike, you want to respond to that? I mean, you say Hilton has been very, 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 very persistent on this matter, and we have actually delayed the signing off of the review of the Electricity Act as a result of this this particular issue, which we're hoping to get a resolve to be able to move to the closure of this review.
Yeah, the topics that I'll summarize. I appreciate the colloquial phrases. The best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. The next best time is today. So Hawaii started over a decade ago on their renewable journey, and that's why they're able to stabilize their energy costs. It's going to take time, and the way to do that is having these large, accelerating the renewable projects. We've observed the challenges with retiring fossil fuel plants and other issues of just generation in the electricity sector. It's complicated. That's why we're encouraging caution of trying to figure out the public-private utility regulator benefits start with a case by case to try and keep it as simple as you can so that you don't have those unintended consequences, so that you can figure out if you have a big entity that wants to make an investment, in the Jamaican economy and the Jamaican people. No one wants to have these rates increased on everyone and all the island residents and island members. So appreciate the two challenges of incentivizing economic investment, attraction of investment, just the complexities of the engineering, the technologies, what you're going to hear from private sector firms. So I just caution and encourage things that we have seen, which are new steps, new ways, the things that we've shown in Hawaii, these public-private through trilateral agreements, arrangements. I have not seen that yet done. So that could be a new way, other new activities and new ways to figure out how to improve all these goals for Jamaica. I appreciate the opportunity to share some insights. Understanding my limitation, you are the experts in Jamaica. I'm just trying to share what we've seen and observed in our experience and working across the globe. And we do share the same goals and really appreciate the challenges that you're facing and really thankful for the opportunity to talk with you.
You've been excellent.
Thanks a lot, Mike. I think Shireen Golding Campbell.
Yes, Mr. Callahan, I hope you're not telling us goodbye quite yet. And if you don't
she's
mind,
a lawyer,
share.
by the way, Mike. Here, she's a lawyer. Both of them are lawyers. Yeah?
We both are. If I
That's
could
why
just
they're so long-winded.
No, Tony's more long-winded than me. So Mr. Callahan, based on how Member Hilton just coached the last part of his remarks, and please forgive me, I had to step out of the room in the course of the committee meeting. But in your experience, when you look at single buyer markets, when there has been grid defection, how has that single buyer operated in terms of its commercial viability? How have they pivoted to adjust to the grid defection that they've experienced? And I know you talked quite a bit about the fossil fuels and how a number of the island states tend to have heavy fossil fuel based energy. Are you seeing a shift in the makeup of those single buyers in those different economies, different states?
So most islands are, and I use the Hawaii example, is it's selected not allow or permit grid defection. They are switching to also a different model. Utilities had a cost of service model, which is an older way of rate recovery. In Hawaii, what they're switching to is a performance-based model, so that the amount that the utility earns is not based on how much electricity they sell, but how well they perform. Because a utility provides a lot of services in terms of providing electricity access to all the island's inhabitants. So in Hawaii, they've added, because of the complexities, they have a Public Utilities Commission. They're setting up this Hawaii Electricity Reliability Administrator, and they are creating new innovative tariffs. They're investing in their grid. At the same time, they're allowing distributed generation, so individuals to produce and consume and distribute. And it's challenging. It's definitely challenging, but it's trying to figure out the success in Kauai, because it's a cooperative model, not an investor-owned utility. They're thinking of all the island and thinking of one island. What can we do in our actions that's best for all on the island, including public and private sectors?
Right. And who typically bears the cost in those models? So when you talk about a utility company that has to respond not just to electricity sale, but the services that surround that, as island nations we experience catastrophe quite often. So we're talking about the maintenance of lines and the whole entire system, and the ability to restore damaged systems, etc. Who bears that cost? Is it the utility company, or is there some amount of spread to the consumers who remain on that grid, or who are on that grid? Because you said they're not allowing the grid defection, right?
So this is you opened a very large topic. It's an important one, and I'm just going to share two examples, and I'm not, because this isn't a detailed analysis, it's just history. On the island of Kauai in the early 2000s, there was a utility, an investor-owned utility. They had a severe storm that destroyed a lot of the grid. And at that time, there was challenging to have an investor-owned utility rebuild. And so that's when they switched to their cooperative model. It's a small island. Their load is only about 80 megawatts. So it's an order of magnitude smaller than Jamaica. On the island of Oahu, so still in the state of Hawaii, they also serve the island of Maui. And there were some devastating wildfires that destroyed the town of Lahaina. In that case, there's been over a $4 billion settlement against the utility, the investor-owned utility. So that's why they're struggling and challenges of how to come up with a way to ensure that the utility is solvent in the face of experiencing massive wildfire. So different business models, different challenges from a hurricane to a wildfire that are both, and those are just history. I'm not saying we haven't and weren't involved in those the details or those, but just sharing what we've observed based on our knowledge of those islands and continuing to use that just as one example.
Thank you so much. I must tell you that I really am going to listen to this again this evening because this is a lot of information. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. I certainly appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's a challenge.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
On behalf of the committee, very, very useful information. I know that you're not here to just give us guidance, and it's much appreciated. I think everybody's a lot clearer in relation to Member Hilton's position, which he has been pushing, and obviously the pros and cons. But I think we're all on the same page that, what exists now has not proven or not delivered what we expected it to. And the cause for that is because of the high cost of electricity. So obviously we have to do something. So I know that my team at MSET was in touch with you, and I know that there were some challenges in timing, but thankfully that we are here today and we've gotten your guidance and your advice, and most importantly, your data on other jurisdictions. So if we need you, we'll be back in touch with you. But thanks so much.
Sounds good. I will drop unless you say otherwise.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
All the
thank
best. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, so members, I think we have gotten some very, very sound, solid data and backgrounds in terms of what transpires in other jurisdictions. The question is whether or not Member Hilton's proposal can be moved forward, and I think we would need to hear from Ms. Campbell and the MSET team. Ms. Campbell, you got a good understanding. I noticed you didn't ask any questions, so I take it that you're very clear on what was said. And Member Hilton has made his position very, very clear. I suspect that for the first time, maybe Member Golding Campbell is more convinced now than she was before, based on Mike's presentation and Member Hilton's interrogation of.
Oh no, Chair, careful now. Are you saying that I agree with Member Hilton?
It sounds
Perish the thought.
I don't know. It sounds that way to me.
Really, what's wrong in agreeing with something that is right?
Ms. Campbell, unfortunately, Brian is not here, who had to set up this meeting. I thank him, but I think he had a slight mishap. Member Miller, you're on. I see you're on. I don't know if Member Paul finished the highway yet, or you're still on the highway. But we really need to take some decisions, because we need to get this committee report finalized and tabled. We had hoped to do it last year, and of course, Member Hilton and Member Hill raised some issues that has caused us to delay and to look and do what we are doing today, which is to get outside advice. So, Ms. Campbell, Mr. Miller, anybody that wants to say, but I'd like to hear from Ms. Campbell in terms of what was presented and what Member Hilton is proposing, and where does that carry us? I see Member Miller, his name on the screen. Are you trying to say something or no?
No, sir, Chair.
Chair, can I assist? Let me make a suggestion. Listen to Mr. Callahan and understanding that the option, there is a balancing act that has to be observed, because nothing in my proposal, I wouldn't want to worsen the impact of whatever decision we make on the general customer base. That's not my intention, nor do I think, if properly done, there will be unintended consequences in that direction. But I think we may have a solution, and I say that because just this week, the Minister of Finance reminds that the government is working towards finalizing legislation on large scale and pioneering investments. Now, it seems to me, if no other category of investors come in for consideration in terms of not being tied to an increase in cost framework that the JPS is at the moment. And here, I take account of the complication that we already have a low defection from our grid. And I'm not assuming that whichever government comes to office will have an easy time in pulling that back. I'm not assuming that. Because as Mr. Callahan said, in those small islands, many of them, they don't allow defection. We have, for whatever the reasons. And it is part of, apart from the fuel, the fossil fuel costs that are unstable, this defection itself, the permission of defection is having an adverse impact on the cost structure now, and I believe even longer term. So what I would want to say is this. The intent of the SEZ is to drive investment and to create employment and to help to positively impact our economy. Since the government is agreeing with the opposition, because remember the opposition did pass the Large Scale and Pioneering Industry Act in 2014. I haven't seen a new legislation to see in which way it differs or supports or tweaks, but what is agreed is that there is a need for such a legislation that looks at large scale. And my understanding based on the conversation that I've been having is that they're talking about a US $1 billion threshold. I think I heard the ministers of finance say that. If you're talking about that level of investment, you already have an SEZ authority. I don't know how the two would blend in terms of benefits or incentives, but it seems to me that at a minimum, those large-scale investment cannot be subjected to the existing arrangement with the JPS that will impose costs, electricity costs, and carrying costs. And nor am I in favor of JPS's stated position, which is that the single buyer arrangement should continue and the government instead find additional fiscal space and fiscal expenditure to address this problem.
Ms. Campbell, I'm anxious to hear your opinion on this based on, obviously, your knowledge and legal background on this matter that we've been grappling with.
Minister, the Electricity Act, as far as our interpretation supports, is that it allows for different licenses to be granted: a transmission, distribution, dispatch, supply, generation. The particular request regarding the SEZ is to allow for them to be able to sell. We know that the developers can self-generate under the provisions of the Act. The issue in our mind is the fact that the exclusive license which JPS has allows for JPS only to supply electricity in terms of selling it to consumers. And that is where the issue is in our estimation.
No, so Ms. Campbell, you just restated the issue, the problem. And we're clear, I am clear at least, as to what the problem is. The minister said, and I agree with the minister, that we need to make a recommendation from the committee. And I'm proposing, I've gone beyond that, I'm proposing that, Minister Hill throws in another issue. He's insistent that apart from the single buyer, the right of first refusal be examined, and I think that generally has certainly have the opposition support. But my specific suggestion is that at a minimum, the large-scale investors, which there's an existing act that speaks to large-scale and pioneering investors. The problem is that the regulations are not put in place, so it's not operational. Under the new law that the Minister of Finance speaks about, that we've yet to see, but we're anticipating, because she was on radio this week saying that the legislation is almost at hand and will be submitted. But it seems to me that with that pending, where a large-scale investor, an investor that expends a minimum of $1 billion United States dollar, I can tell you it will be only a few of those. I don't expect a flood of $1 billion investment, but I do expect some. And in the context of the SEZ, it is likely to be in a SEZ arrangement, because I think that's one of the benefits, I would argue, that should accrue to such an investor. I'm saying that in respect of even those, even if we frame it, Minister, just allow for those large scale meaning investors of $1 billion or more, then I think we have a solution without any large impact on the existing grid. After all, these are new investors. It's not a defection, as I was arguing, and I'm prepared to argue. So there's no defection from the grid. It's simply saying the JPS will not be allowed to impose its inefficient and costly structure on these new investors. Otherwise, we'll have no decision. Well, we'll have a decision not to invest in Jamaica. This has been our experience under the SEZ, both for myself and Minister Hill. I haven't administered the legislation, and Minister Hill now having the experience of operating it. So, and that's my observation. We're getting none, and we're not likely to get any.
So let me put something to Ms. Campbell, and of course the legal minds on the committee. What if we were to establish a license that can be issued to a SEZ that allows for self-generation, and then pass regulations outlining the criteria? Is that something that could be done to accommodate that? Because the notion of selling, as I have been informed, will always breach all island license. So, I mean, I'm completely in agreement that something has to happen. It's a matter of what is it that can happen for us now while we deal with the bigger picture down the road.
Yeah.
On the basis that obviously we have a renegotiation that pretty much starts now, 2025 or 2027. So the bigger issues can be dealt with during those discussions and negotiations. But I agree that to sign off on the report and not have something addressing this, then I mean, kicking the can down the road.
Minister, Chairman?
Yes, yeah, Member Paul.
Yes, I'm trying to get my photo up, but let me. All right, you better continue. I'm trying to get my photo. Let's see. Okay.
Well, Member Paulwell is trying to do that, Minister. Okay, there he is. All right, go ahead.
Right. Minister, I think the discussion has taken some very positive turns, and especially because your colleague minister is in support of the recommendation that Tony Hilton and others, including myself, have been making, that this probably should get the attention of your cabinet just to get them to ponder on it. And as you have quite rightly put it, there are some important negotiations to commence. And you could actually use this as leverage to getting some early understanding and acquiescence on this aspect of the policy. So my own suggestion is that if you could get the cabinet to support this position, you could use it as a major plank in your negotiations, which, as you know, must start somewhere by mid-year. And perhaps you could encourage JPS as you give and take in these negotiations to give early on this point.
Member Golden, Member Hilton, I think we have a consensus with the input of Member Paulwell. I have no issue doing that. It's always better in these situations to get the cabinet to
And
concur.
Chair, I'm sorry, Chair, and also if we could take a look at what would the amendments, the specific amendments that we're asking for look like, given this proposal, and the potentially and the consequential amendments that might arise. If maybe we could see something like that in writing, that might also inform your own discussion with your cabinet colleagues. But I would sort of love to see it now put in black and white in terms of what part of the act we would amend and how we would amend to encapsulate this kind of a scheme.
Thank you, Member Golden, for that.
I'm in agreement with both suggestions. No?
Say again, I missed that.
Hilton, I'm saying I'm in agreement with both suggestions, both from Senator Golding and MP Paulwell, that on the two matters, if we could reproduce something in writing that we could look at coming out of this meeting, the suggestion that this, with cabinet's backing, this could form part of the plank for early discussion with JPS in the renewal of the license, and that being a sort of early harvest, if you will, from those discussions.
So Member Hilton, Member Paulwell, Member Golden, and others, the truth of the matter is that at this stage where we are, it doesn't make sense that we just try to conclude the report for concluding's sake. If it's not going to have and deal with the issues that we have been faced with in relation to the SEZ specifically, then obviously it's not going to give us the bang that we're looking for. So what I can commit to do as chairman and minister is that I will definitely huddle with my team and get something in draft form, share it. Once we have a understanding and agreement that it captures everything, and take it to cabinet in the shortest possible time. And that way, I think that we will be able to at least conclude this last thorny issue with our resolution, which makes some kind of change. Because as we said before, as the way it stands now, we're not going to go any much further in terms of the level of investment that we're looking for in the SECs. So I have no issue with that whatsoever. Once I have concurrence, we can sign off on that.
Agreed that something is drafted, we look at it and see if it responds to what we've discussed here, and seems to an emergent consensus on the way forward.
Ms. Campbell, you're clear on exactly what has been discussed with the presentation by Mr. Callahan and the inputs from the members?
Yes, Minister.
All right,
I'm
so
clear.
we'll have to have a discussion with Pierce and discuss now and see the next steps and put some timelines to them.
Okay, sure, Minister. And I'd just like to mention that the ministry had recommended that the right of first refusal fall away, and possibly put a sunset provision on that.
Hope it's not a long sunset.
Not at all.
No, no long sunset. Nothing, not like that. All right, well, listen, very, very informative. I think we've gotten somewhere. Presentation was well received. And we can definitively say that we have a plan going forward. So before we close off, I would just like to go through the minutes of October 4th, 2024. In attendance was Ms. Senator Golden, who I suspect chaired it for me, Mr. Miller, Mr. Hill, Mr. Paul, and Mr. Hilton. So 4 out of 5 are actually on the call now. So if I could get any confirmation of these minutes, any changes, corrections. As I said, I don't think I was a chair. It was member Roland Campbell.
It wasn't, yes, Chairman, I did act for you on that day.
All right. So would you move for me then, Chairman?
I so move.
All right. Seconded by
Thank you.
Hilton. Any matters arising coming out of these minutes?
None for me.
All right. So we can.
I believe the matters arising would have been addressed by today's meeting.
Yes, I definitely. If there was any at all, that's for sure, 100%.
Yeah, that was.
All right, members, you'll hear from us in short order. What I will do is I will send out something as soon as I've had a discussion and give you exactly the next steps and the timelines.
And Minister, if I might, before we close off, I just want to, on behalf of my colleagues on the committee, thank your team at the ministry. That last meeting, they were tasked to really go and have meetings and consultations to come back to address the issues and the concerns that the committee members had. And I know, having been exposed to some of it, that they did so in earnest. So we thank them very much, and we thank them for the collaboration that brought Mr. Callahan here. I certainly appreciated the information that he shared with us. So I just want to commend Mr. Richardson, Ms. Campbell, and the team who work to support you. And of course, I can't leave out our permanent secretary there, Mrs. Palmer. So thank you so very much.
Spoken for all of them.
Thank you so much. Have a safe and peaceful evening and rest of the week.
Okay, same to
God
us.
bless you.
And your staff.
And yeah, to everyone.
All right. Good.
heart free, wages increase, housing scheme are built up, we have more opportunities, roads built, and the dollar stable.